Welcome back to the Media Shaman Toolkit. This is part 3, Guerrilla Media Making for Media Shamans. We're going to try to take all of that heavy material we gave you as kind of like a graduate course in transformative media making and compressed into a few hours, but hopefully it's given you some things to get your brain going and get you started. And this one, we really want to kind of bring it all together so that you have practical consciousness that you can take into your media making and your media consumption. And also, if you find yourself with your smartphone in a situation that you think should be recorded, you want to make sure you have tools to align your intentional field with your practice so that everything comes out the way you want it to. So I just want to mention also that there is some background noise in Mark's place. That's an air conditioner, unfortunately, because we are in California. Not only is it warm, but somewhat warm, but we also have wildfires, so there's no way to leave the windows open. So apologize for that sound, but hopefully it won't be too bad for you.
Guerrilla media making is essentially on the fly. You know, you're in a situation and it's like, that's it, man. You have to kind of do something, you know, in that moment. And how do you do that, not from a technical perspective, but how do you do it in a way that you're helping? And that helping could be in many different forms. But right now, with the situation we're in the middle of a media war for our consciousness, and people are polarized. And if we do a situational analysis of what's going on, this polarization is kind of one of the primary fields that we must transcend as media shamans if we are going to help, because that is the essential problem. And that's actually the essential target approach for this war. So the polarization we're seeing everywhere inside of us and around us is the problem, not all the other stuff. The other stuff is all caught in that polarization field. We're not able to talk about things because we're polarized. So we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit in terms of what you need to do to prepare yourself for those situations where you're in a polarized event and you don't want to be spreading that polarization, and you don't want to get caught in it yourself and spread it, and you don't want to spread only one side of it. So really being caught in the polarization will tend to only frame it with one side. But we also cannot get caught in that framing everything as equal, because then we're still inside the polarization field. We have to find a way to go beyond that. So that's what we're going to be introducing new material here. But first, we want to give you a whole sense of the different tools at your disposal that we've already introduced, and then introduce these new tools to bring those together into the practice in the field, if called upon. Or even if you want to, if your intent is something is happening for an extended period of time, you still can use these tools. You know, so it's for the moment, whether you're in it, thrown in a immediate situation, or whether you are targeting a current situation that you're going to plan out. These are all important foundations. So let's begin.
So just to review, in the first class, we've done these 2 classes previously. The first one was a sense-making tools, and then the second one was 10 keys to more powerful transformative media. And the sense-making tools, which was the individual and collective sense-making, we kind of went through in pretty great detail in the first class. We are going to go over the 10 keys, again, just very briefly, because they can actually serve also as awareness practices. So you can use them for your watching media and applying those as awareness practices to help expand your awareness and boost your cosmic address, as we like to say. And you can also use them when you're making media or creating media. You could use these 10 keys specifically in that way. And then in this new class, we're going to go over some shamanic media making tools specific to that process of guerrilla media making.
Beautiful. All right.
We started with the individual sense making.
Yeah, so basically we have these 3 tools for sense making, which is our individual sense making practice, and establishing a collective sense-making network or support system where we do it collectively. And then we introduced slightly a collective intelligence media making, sense-making practice, where you're using your collective sense-making network for the media making process. And that includes if you're creating it in advance or on the fly. So if you're creating in advance, you use your sense-making network to help you get feedback on your intention, what the problem is you're seeing, and how to do it and all that. And then your sense-making collective, you bring that into the field and you work with that together to find deeper stuff. Now, if you're doing it on the fly, if something's happening, if you have a cell phone connection with your team, you can actually be a remote reporter for your collective sense-making team. So that is one of the ways you can incorporate it on the fly. So what we want to do is establish our own individual sense-making practice and collective sense-making team and practice as soon as possible, so that we're ready for when events happen, that we could use them as, just, so these are just preparation. And then when we're in the field, in the middle of a situation, if we're uploading, if we're streaming, and the members of our collective know what's going on, we can be kind of like a support system. And what's important here to understand from the media shaman perspective is when we are bearing witness, which is a practice we're going to be going over here, in the field, locally, and we're doing that live, extending it non-locally, and our collective intelligence network is kind of co-processing it, we are actually penetrating the collective self field in a deeper and more powerful way. So there's a plus to doing it this way in terms of the impact in the collective field. So those are basically the sense-making tools that you need for preparing and for support heading through a situation.
Absolutely. And then in the part 2, we went over the 10 keys for more powerful media. And we'll put up this chart. As you'll notice on this chart now, these keys are now framed more as an awareness practices. So being aware of the coevolution between creator, media, audience, and culture, that's a co-evolutionary awareness practice. And you can use that as a practice in your daily life, even looking around. And the structures of consciousness, where they are mythic, rational, pluralistic, that's actually called altitudinal awareness. What's the altitude? And when that becomes an object in your awareness, all day long as you go around, when you look at political arguments and personal arguments and all kinds of discussions and friendships and enemies and other things, you can begin to see them through that filter of the altitudes, the structures of consciousness. Similarly with the other ones, the developmental awareness is the lines of development, the quadratic awareness is those 4 quadrants. And each of those you can do individually, and as you do them more and more, they'll start to merge and you'll start to do all of them simultaneously. Your brain just begins to adjust, your neuroplasticity adjusts. And then your cosmic address begins to move outwards. So you begin to see more different domains of every situation. So you can kind of take a look at those.
Yeah, these practices actually can help you upgrade your perceptual operating system and accelerate your own evolution as well. And as Jonathan points out, as you practice these more and more, they become automatic and you could hold them simultaneously. And when you're in the field, once again, when we get into a witness collective field state, when we're in the process, we can access these will tend to come up so that in a given situation, we'll almost intuitively be able to go, oh wait, I'm sensing a narrative here, oh, I'm feeling this narrative frame, and the 4 levels, of this unfolding story in this situation. Those kind of things will just happen for you. So you could play with these and each one, but essentially they are very simple. Just taking the frames that we introduced, 4 quadrants, the structures of consciousness, lines of development, levels of story, the intentional field, all of that is easily adapted into a awareness practice by just looking around you and looking for them. Or with the intentional field awareness, is instead of doing that for a story, do that for yourself going into a situation. Right? So if you're heading to an event, then you have a chance to kind of check in with your intentional field. Or if you're swept in the middle of it, try to ground yourself in an intentional field as quickly as possible. And actually, if you have a ready one, so if you have a intentional field ready for on the fly media making, it's you could basically have a a media shaman frame. I am here in the service of the collective self. You could hold that. I'm here. You know, it's like you could choose a simple frame that you could tap into. I tend to use the biggest frame possible, and that's for me the collective self frame, and then a situational frame. So if I'm, you know, if I know that I'm in a polarized event, right, I want to, you know, then basically hold the frame that I want to be able to help transcend that polarization. That's my intentional field. And so you can get that fast. It's like, all right, man, this is polarized, you know, bam, you know, I'm here to not get caught in it, but to try to transcend it. So these are, you know, essential kind of adaptations that you could easily do. For the synchronization of the senses one, you could basically just go through the quadrants, go through the visual and the auditory and the, it's like if you go through the 4 quadrants of a situation or a moment and just feel their synergy. That's a form of sensory synchronization awareness. But the really kind of easy one to do is just quickly being aware of the visual input, your auditory input, the narrative framings that are being generated as you look around you in this situation, and the temporal processes, you know, like what's happening. Is this, you know, if this situation is very time sensitive, or if it's a bigger time frame, then that we want to kind of like be aware of these temporal fields, and if different sides are holding different temporal frames. So you want to play with this kind of, you know, beingness. State awareness is an easy one. You know, what's my state right now, and what's the state of the people around me? You know, all of these things. You know, agency, communion, looking for those patterns. So that's, you know, really it. And the shamanic awareness is going to be the next set of tools that we are going to be talking about. That helps with the shamanic awareness.
And just to clarify, you know, we've spoken a lot through here about integral theory, which for those of you who are new to it, how a lot of this is deriving from that. But really, integral theory is just an attempt to map the existing state of consciousness, the existing structure in which you do all these things that we've talked about. So as you begin to do these different practices and apply them to your life and the media you watch and the media you create, it will help move you towards the integral structure of consciousness. And then you can leave the maps behind, because you'll just automatically be operating and seeing multiple dimensions and perspectives at all times, which can make you much more discriminating and begin to see even where pathologies are occurring on all sides at all times, in different places.
Yeah, the more you do this work, you study these things, you're actually physically restructuring your brain to operate from the integral structure. And these, as Jonathan said, they'll become synthesized and integrated, and what seems very complex and vast now will become easy and simple.
Yeah, I actually just yesterday saw some research that people who do future forecasting, who imagine a scenario in the future and how would you react, just imagining that actually has structural effects on your brain. It changes your brain to do this imagining of different future scenarios. So all of these different things, as you use your brain, it begins to do that. So I guess we should.
It's constantly morphing.
Yep. So now we're going to start right off with some shamanic media making tools, and these are all tools to help your shamanic media making awareness. So take it away, Mark.
Okay. So what is shamanic media making tools and shamanic awareness, right? Shamanic awareness is that transformative state of beingness. When a shaman becomes the tool themselves, you are the instrument. And you use these other tools as part of your being and presence. And they're extensions of your process. So, and we have tools, there's shamanic tools to bring you in, to work with your own ability to be in a transformative healing, to be a transformative healing channel, and ways to work with them when you're trying to extend that. So that's essentially what we're talking about here. And essentially what we're saying is, how do we be a change agent? an agent of transformation in the midst of the chaos and polarization or real dangers in everyday life. And so how do we be an instrument of change for ourselves and others? Because the key is it's got to be simultaneous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to share these in an awareness practice to take us through an imagined event. As Jonathan was saying, you know, when we imagine future events, our brain is actually working to lay down the foundations for those frames that we're using. So I'm going to try to do this, that, you know, we're talking about these from this shamanic field that I'm talking about. So let's get in a comfortable position. And focus on our breath for a moment. And once again, you can have your eyes open or closed, depending on what's best for you to visualize, what we're attempting to visualize here. So now imagine ourselves in the middle of a street. And there's a protest happening. There are different groups opposing and supporting things. Some groups appear aggressive. And you feel like something's going to happen here. And you feel called to share it. So what do? The first thing is trying to bring yourself to center, and hopefully you've been working on knowing your cosmic address and upgrading your perceptual operating system. Hopefully you've worked on synchronizing your three brains, whereas now you can consciously try to access, what am I thinking here? What am I feeling here? What does my gut tell me here? And these are the tools hopefully we're bringing into this moment. And we want to try to sense what's going on here and what our intentions is as fast as we can. Now, if it fits into any kind of frames that we've already been exploring with our individual and collective sense-making practices and tools and teams, and this is an event that's taking place within those bigger sense-making frames, then we could use those that we already run in. If not, then we want to do a quick situational analysis. And if we practice this beforehand, we can do this rather quickly. And the situational analysis is, what we can do is start at our individual level. You know, what are we, once again, feeling, thinking, and our gut response, what's going on here. Then just try to be aware of the relationships happening. Extend that to the relationships, look around for the relationships, and then try to expand that, you know, into the groups. Like, what are the, not just relationships between people, but what are the relationships between the groups? And then try to like extend that into the cultural fields that these groups are kind of expressing and representing in this moment. So you're starting to go outside of this and recognizing the cultural fields that are impacting each group, and then try to hold this in the social frame of, all right, so and this is part of what's going on in my country, or this, you know, in this society, or in this, you know, city in this moment, or whatever. And then you want to try to keep going to see if you could sense the meta levels. So it's like, is this part of the media war? I mean, look at this. It's like a lot of this polarization can be coming from the media war itself, because nonlinear warfare is designed to polarize us. So bring that frame in, recognizing that everyone here may be, a lot of what's going on, we're being manipulated into this polarization. Things that do polarize us often that they're being accentuated. So no one here is the enemy. We are all victims when we enter this meta level frame and holding the situation from that frame. And then trying to hold that and tap into our evolutionary framework. All right, so here I am, in all of this, and try to just quickly snap into, what my stream of my own life that brought me here, and my friends, my families, my relationships, my subcultures, my groups, all of those fields that you are looking at in the situation, how those evolved into this moment for you and everybody else. Just holding that, you don't have to go unpack it, but it's like holding those as like a perceptual awareness stream that this is what's happening here. And then try to go into the bigger one, right? This is part of the great transition we're going through. And how does this, what's going on here and how is it related to the great transition? Or, is this collective self-exposure therapy, which we talked about? So, and coming from there, and this can help us actually come into both a witness frame and an intervention frame. So the collective self frame is very useful here because it is a non-polarization frame. It is non-dual, what we call it. It's close to the non-dual. So the collective self frame is all of us, all sentient being is part of one collective self. And within that frame, it is non-dual. So if we anchor ourselves in that awareness and enter this polarized field as a witness and looking at things from that space, holding all the other levels we just went through really quickly, then we become the change. We become the change agent in that polarization field. And then we take our phone and hold it, consecrate it as an extension of this awareness and as service into the field. And then surrender into this moment, this pure being moment, recognizing all of these fields and all of these streams is coming together right now, and be fully present. And at this moment, then you can even deepen that even more by doing a shamanic frame of making a friend of death, which is, if this is my last moment on earth, what would I do? And so now you see how we've got a situational analysis, a framework that is outside of the polarization field, and we are trying to be fully present to this multidimensional moment of beingness. And that is the shamanic field you want to be in. And that field itself is a change agent. And whatever you do from that field should extend that transformative capacity. Now, focus back on your breath. And return to this moment. So the key is we are the instrument of change. And if we're coming from that, we could act instantaneously without getting caught in the polarization field, without speaking to the choir, because we're trying to hold the multiple levels and multi-dimensions, and so we would naturally be speaking across the field. So the key is to try to do all these practices in advance as much as you can, depending on how much time you have before you're thrown into one of these situations, and try to get it so these things are fast. And you could do it really quickly. Like I could pop into those frames now, within like 60 seconds, because I've been doing it. And so you can just go back in. So now there's a couple more things that we can give you, a few more frames and tools that you can use for strengthening your ability to do that and your capacities to do stuff in that field. So we begin with frames of enactment. So there I am in that field, and in this situation, I've got it all there. and I have my camera and I'm going to point and shoot. Now, when I start that process, I'm now entering a different field. The situational awareness and analysis field is a field right there. But then when I bring that phone out and consecrate it to extend my field and walk into this, now I'm in an enactment field. Okay, it's the shaman now, you know, we're around the fire and the shaman's got their tools and they're in their state of consciousness. And now they're going to attempt to heal you. So how do we work in that flowing field? See, that's not just, first, that exercise we were doing is anchoring you into that field. Now, how do we use that field, move that field into an enactment process? Well, it's anchored now in our conscious intention. That's now been rooted for us. And then we want our effort, this conscious intention, to go into this effort. So that's like the foundation. But on that, how does that move through us, right? So there's certain frames of enactment that we can hold. And we could do those separately as each thing arises for us. We could ping pong between them or hold them simultaneously or in pairs. But these are, we could actually end up synergizing these into a unfolding enactment frame pattern. So on the personal level, you want to be holding it as a personal vision quest. I am here to learn, to grow. I am here for myself, trying to, you know, I am the instrument, but I am also here to grow and learn, you know, what my transformation is. So that's the personal vision quest enactment frame. Then there's the holy media encounter frame. And that word holy can be spelled W in parentheses and then H-O-L-Y. And holy media encounter means we're going to try to tap into the collective self at every level. So if I'm interacting with somebody, trying to capture them, extend, here's the thing, what we want to do in a holy media encounter is we want to hold the frame that the opposite of what some primal traditions hold, that taking a picture takes away someone's soul. We're going to hold the frame here that we are here to extend this person's soul with what we are doing. And that this other person is part of the collective self. Or if you want to hold it in a religious or spiritual, you know, term, you know, on a field there is the I thou, you know, I am speaking to the one, I am speaking to God. You know, it's Mother Teresa, when asked how she goes through every day with all the sick and maimed and all that and still keep going. You know, how do you keep seeing that and not get ground down? And she said, I do not see sick people. I do not see maimed people. I see my Lord. Now that's a frame, that's a holy encounter frame. You know, and that's what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. But we can hold the collective self frame because that's a solid frame that is very, it's the same frame in many ways. In many traditions, that state we're seeking, that witness state, that is the collective self. So in Christianity, we can hold that as the Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness has the same connection in Judaism to the term Mashiach, which is actually the root word for Messiah, which is actually the collective self-consciousness. So most religious traditions actually have the collective self, but in their own frame. And it's also, if you're in the scientific frame, the collective self is an actual scientific frame as well, as we talked about. So this is what you want to do. This is a holy encounter. How may it be of service? You know, and being in that state of I thou, you're transcending the polarization on a relational level. And you're holding the camera in that field. And you're speaking to them and holding that frame. It has a lot of power. We actually did research on this and it is observable. I did a interview with a shaman and holding this type of frame of enactment, and her husband was watching us from the house and he couldn't hear what was going on. At the end, he came up to me and said, "What were you doing? I've seen my wife interviewed 1,000 times, but what you did was not the same thing. What were you doing?" It felt different. So that was an observable input. And we've done more research on it. So this is a powerful thing. The other frame is a collective intelligence creation frame. So you want to also hold any framing that you got from your collective sense-making team. And if you're connected to them remotely, then you want to also work with them and hold them as a extension of your own field. So the camera in your hand is a connection to your collective intelligence team, you know, your collective sense-making, media-making team. And that can be a powerful tool. You're holding a local and non-local consciousness. And even if your phone isn't able to connect with them, if you hold that in your awareness, bring to mind your collective team and the energy of your collective field, and hold yourself as an agent of that field, because you are going to be reporting back into them. So holding that frame. And then finally, you want to hold the frame of co-creating with the universe. And we got pretty good data on this as well, the power of this approach. And that is really, if we're open to it, the universe supports what we're doing. And there's this classic idea in media making, standard media making, that Murphy's law is a foundational thing that happens, that what can go wrong will go wrong. But from the co-creating with the universe frame, anything that's an obstacle is seen as a message from the collective field. It's helping you to go in a certain direction. So if you're going in one direction and there's an obstacle there, say, all right, where is the opening? Where does the flow want to go? There's some great examples of that from myself and from others, and we did studies on it as well. And what happens is when we tap in to what Sam Shepard was talking about when he taught us, basically what I call the living story, is when you're seeking to express the truth, and you take that truth as like your foundation, and whatever you do, use that as your anchor and just extend it. Then as you're doing that, all the input from inside and outside yourself feeds into that. So I was seeking a story, seeking a truth that I could tell a story, to use Sam Shepard's approach. And I was hunting for it, and there was obstacles in my path all the way. And then finally it was like, I give up. A friend of mine came into town. So I just said, all right, I'm gonna stop seeking right now. And I took her to this cool restaurant on the ocean in Malibu, and we're hanging out there. And then this homeless guy comes in and sits down behind us and starts talking to the empty seat. And we're listening to what he's saying. And in this moment, I'm like blown away. Because what he was saying was totally insane and profound at the same time. And this kind of weird level. And it was just like, whoa. And so what happened is the waiter came and, asked, what he was doing and all that. And, he introduced his friend in the empty space, and the waiter got weird, but then he saw that the guy had money, so he was okay, and he went away. And then the guy looked at the empty space and said, write this down. Must go to Montana for Easter. And he thought for a second, and then he listened. Oh, no, there's this little town in Montana, and every year for Easter, they pick a normal guy off the street and have him be Christ and carry the cross through the town. And he went, always wanted to be that guy. And in that moment, it was like, that's my truth, whatever that crazy truth is. And I went into it, and I started to try to create a story from it. And I swear to you, the universe was like just going crazy, sending me people and things and objects. And when we did the shoot, everybody after the shoot said, that was the most magical, mysterious experience we've ever had. Everything that was going on in their own lives was playing into it. And it was just like, people were just freaking out. It was this amazing feel when you kind of embrace this process. And it shows up in the work. That work was very powerful. And even in a small, subtle way.
So that also happened to you on another film, I believe, where you were shooting with a stream, and the stream stopped streaming just before you were shooting.
Yeah.
Familiar?
Yeah, this was a great one. This really kind of will send this home to you. So I was doing a film at the AFI, and it was a short one, and there was a scene with a stream. two actors, you know, there's two characters in a stream. And we found a great stream in a park below the observatory. And we were scouting it. And what we did our due diligence to figure out what can go wrong in advance, right? And so we looked for, you know, any kind of things that can go wrong. We showed up there at the time we wanted to shoot, on the day we wanted to shoot, several times to see what was going, you know, the whole thing. Then the day of the shoot, we show up and there's no stream. Gone, dry. And we're all going, no. So what do? So the producer heads off to try to figure out what was going on. In the meantime, we started to shoot the close-ups and inserts and anything we had to shoot that didn't involve a shot of the stream. So we did all that, and then the producer comes back down and tells us that the stream was the runoff from the observatory air conditioner, and they shut it off that day. But the sharp producer that he was, he paid him $10 to turn the air conditioning back on. So he said, all right, we're going to be set. It's going to be just a few minutes. It should be, you know. So we're all set up. All of a sudden, there's a rumbling sound. And this flood just pours through. And it's no longer a stream. It's just this torrent. But we shoot it anyways, because we don't, you know, this is, you know, and get it back to the cutting room, and the sound is unusable. And I have 24 hours to edit it and screen. So there's no time to do reshoot. So we got the actors quickly to do voiceovers and did the whole thing as a voiceover. And I created this montage and all this weird stuff, showed the film. That was everyone's favorite scene. Everyone was just like, that was the most amazing scene. The rest had problems, but that scene, everybody loved. So that really kind of shows you the universe was really working in a very mysterious, cool way.
Sometimes it does. That happened on one of my favorite films is a movie called La Jetée, a 23-minute French new wave film from the 60s, which is told almost all in still shots. That was filmed in normal films, but the film was no good, but they were able to extract stills from it, and it turned into this sort of revolutionary film. You never know what's going to happen. You co-create with the universe.
So it's not Murphy's law. It's Murphy's blessing.
Murphy's gift.
Murphy's gift. It's Murphy's gift. So that's the frame you want to hold no matter what you're doing. Just, you know, you're co-creating with the collective self, basically. And being in that field, this is, I'll just point this out here. A lot of the work we did at Interval Research, which was that think tank, was really exploring these kind of dimensions of how does intention and presence and consciousness, can that extend through media? Does this actually have a observable impact? And we actually were very successful in many ways. There was solid evidence that these kind of framings, what we frame, how we hold it, how we come into a situation, has incredible power way beyond what we imagine. And we had some theories of how that worked and all that from quantum theory or energy medicine, but we didn't have time or the funds to really kind of, you know, extend the research into their discoveries, but it does work. So that is kind of the foundation here of the framings that you can use, the tools at your disposal as a media shaman in those kind of given situations. Now we also have other practices and stuff, but before we get there, it's important to talk about the shadow. And so when we're in a personal vision quest, or when we're in a polarized situation and look in the collective fields, a lot of what's going on there, a lot of the polarization is coming from shadow material coming up and trying to express itself. And one of the most important ways we could help and intervene in a polarized field is, besides being outside of the polarization field ourselves as that being the change, we can also look at the shadows that are being expressed and processed here. And that gives us actually a key into potential interventions we may be able to do. If I know what shadow material this is bringing up in me, see if I can observe any shadow material patterns that I'm seeing around me individually, collectively, relational, you know, and even, you know, if in advance I've already done some shadow awareness around what's going on in the social field right now. It's, with our collective sense-making field. So let's real quick, I want to cover the shadow. Not get too deeply, but give you enough so that you understand the shadow, what we're dealing with here. So the shadow is merely, not merely, because it's pretty hardcore, everything that we have not fully faced and dealt with, every lesson we have not fully learned, that we've put on hold, or we've denied, or ignored, or any kind of input that we have retranslated into something we can handle that is pointing to something that we don't want to face. All of those things contribute to our shadow material. Anything that we haven't fully owned, learned the lesson from, and let go of. As a society, and we have shadows as individuals. All of us have a primal wound that, and for mine, that was the trauma that led to my stuttering. And it's been, this primal wound is with us, for our whole lives, for us to work through and work with. But the primal wound then becomes our gift. As I said earlier, how my teachers then were suddenly telling me that my stuttering was my call to become a media shaman. That primal wound led me there. That led me here. So our primal, so that's the key to how owning and learning from the shadow, it transmutes it into a blessing. Every shadow has its gift. And that is what shadow work is. And once we get the gift, the shadow dissipates because its job is done. The shadow's job is really, it's an evolutionary lesson that we haven't learned yet, and it's not going to let go until we learn it. And that's an underlying meta frame we can use in the midst of what's going on in our process, recognizing everybody's got this shadow material. Every subgroup and group and cultural field has their own shadow materials on top of that, that is working through us individually. And then there's the bigger social shadow going on. And then there's the whole collective self shadow. What's humanity repressing? What's humanity as a species? How, and so coming from there, we could begin to understand that we can't fully evolve, transcend, and include something until we've healed these shadow materials at all dimensions of a problem. And I just want to go into something concrete as a concrete example.
I was going to say, the poet Mary Oliver once said, "Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." There's a kind of wonderful quote that sums that up. And more to that point Mark was making, that sort of as he was saying, I think in the previous class, that as you become aware of a structure, that's when you're no longer in it and you're in the next one. And that's also true of shadow. As you become aware of your shadow, you've put light on it and it's no longer shadow. But it's constant work to become aware of your shadow and to illuminate it.
Yes, yeah. And then if our interventions and actions and enactments, see, now the media shaman has a wound. When we look, that's what the media shaman does. That's what the shaman does. Heals our wounds and helps us use our wounds as evolutionary lessons. So you, the media shaman, you're entering the media sphere and the media field at the local and non-local level. You're there to assess the situation. And that includes looking for the wounds, the individual and collective wounds that are at play here. And then to try to get as big a picture of the wounding as possible. And then you could see how any action you take in that field, you could get a sense of, all right, am I just operating out of my own personal wound? Or am I just targeting this? So it's like, it gives us, the media shaman, tools to diagnose the patient of that moment. And the biggest intervention level we could come from is the collective self. And right now, polarization is a major wound, challenge, shadow that the collective self is facing during this great transition. And so if we come from that, this is an example of when we recognize this collective shadow. Polarization is an actual collective shadow, that it's the us-them pattern that we all have. And recognizing that at the individual relational collective level is we're up. This polarization, fundamental to that, is that us-them polarization thought pattern and paradigm in our civilization, in our consciousness.
And that pattern is ubiquitous now. I mean, if you go to Facebook, if you go to anywhere, on both sides, the whole idea of it being a bipartisan problem is that idea that there's an us-them. Both sides, the left and the right, us versus them. Trump supporters, Biden supporters, whichever group you want to identify with, that polarization is a form of othering.
Yeah. So if we're doing a shamanic analysis of the collective self right now, that would be our main healing goal, is transcending that and unpacking that. And if we hold that frame in the midst of what's going on right now, when we're recording this class, this is the assessment. We're in this deep polarization field, and we can't get to the next stage of development as a civilization without transcending that. But we have to face the shadow material of this. So it is actually, when we see it like that, the polarization we're seeing is a gift, because the shadow's coming to the surface. And so when we hold it like that, it's like, all right, the shadow's coming up, the polarization is coming up, and the individual is the self. So what can I do here? How can I come from that? And how could I not get caught in my own shadow? And what's the healing here? What can I do? How can I help this polarized field become less polarized?
That's one of the reasons in the first class we talked about how there's a lot of our systems incentivize polarization too. So we're also dealing with structural incentives for polarization built into social media, built into the political system, built into a lot of control systems, essentially, even corporate.
Built into algorithms.
Built into algorithms of society,
It's built into how we communicate. It's a foundational civilizational framework that is, and it served a purpose. At different stages, it serves different purposes. But the transition we're in now is the first one humanity has ever had to make, that is calling us to face this one.
Right.
So
and
this is the big kahuna.
Right. That is an important point, that if you're alive in the time of kingdoms, where you're in a walled castle and a walled city, and there's other walled cities out there, and you all have armies and you're all fighting one another, then that polarization was sort of an essential survival mechanism to function, because otherwise people just come and take over your kingdom and take all your crops. But now we have a situation where we literally have global wide issues that can't be solved from any individual groups. It can't be solved from the nation state perspective, let alone a tribal perspective.
And then here's another important key right off of that important key, is if we find ourselves in a very mythic situation, of an us-them situation, sometimes it's required for us to frame our intervention mythically. But to have that mythic patterning rooted in this higher, deeper, more expansive frame. And there's some great examples of that in movies.
Right, we've talked about Black Panther. There's a great example in Black Panther when the guy from the tribe, I don't know if hopefully you've all seen the movie, but there's a guy from a tribe up in the mountains who comes down to become the king. And he's very mythic, but he's also well-spoken. He's not crazy. And he says, you've left the kingdom in the hands of a girl. You're a weak king, so I want to be the king. And they have a fight, what's supposed to be a fight to the death, but at the end, the king, T'Challa, manages to subdue him and says, I don't want to kill you, tap out, essentially, because your people need you and you fought with honor. So he actually uses a mythic language. You have fought with honor, your people need you. These are mythic ideas, but he uses that to communicate a rational idea that you should stay alive because I don't want to kill you. And it actually makes more sense for you not to die right now. So he's able to bring that guy into the rational structure. And later on in the movie, he actually does transition into a rational structure more solidly, one of the number of characters that transition up a stage. So yeah, as a media maker, if you want to communicate to people who are at Mythic or in the us versus them field, whether they're liberals or conservatives, a lot of people are in that us versus them field. So you can have to use their languaging, but you need to communicate something that's a structure above where they're at.
And also recognize that often both sides are not recognizing, well, most of the time, they're not recognizing that their argument, they're coming from totally different worldviews and structures of consciousness. And one side is projecting the other's patterns as evil or this or that or this, but when they're actually differences in worldview. And so you want to kind of be able to understand that if you're trying to intervene. Like, for example, if you're one of the big kind of challenges for the pluralistic and progressive field of being is that a lot of things from the mythic magic structures, pre-modern structures, are horrific for people at pluralistic progressive, and they seem like horrible amoral wrongs, and we tend to attack the people for that, not realizing that at the structure of consciousness they're at, that is normal functional, and that's a frame that's normal for that structure. So it's like all sides are not realizing the polarization of worldviews that is going on, and even if they are, they're not aware enough to recognize that they're trying to make someone skip a stage of development. So it's like, if you know, and we do this at the international level as well. You know, a pluralistic postmodern country would go into a tribal country and bring in all of this postmodern structures and things, ideologies, and it doesn't stick because you're asking them to skip 2 to 3 stages of development. But they don't realize, you know, so it's like, and it insults them and it creates polarization and nobody knows what's going on. So there's a lot of subtle things we can work with here as the media shaman, recognizing these dynamics and these fields, and you know.
Yep.
So this is part of what you have to learn.
Yeah, one of the best things you can do as a media shaman is to use a term called pattern interrupt. You can use pattern interrupts. So when you see that someone is in a pattern, if you recognize what structure it's coming from, sometimes it's a pathology in the structure. Usually if it's creating conflict or division, there's something pathological, no matter what side they're on. And so you can pattern interrupt that and figure out how to come in from their structure, but do something that'll help them step out of their pathology or step out of their shadow that they're enacting. So that's one of the reasons it helps to really be aware of these different levels and the 4 quadrants. So because sometimes somebody's pathology is in one quadrant and they're not seeing the other quadrants. So they're not seeing the whole picture.
Yeah. And so the key is to try to get these foundations in advance as much as we can, and then try to play with them in the field as best we can. You know, it's like, and just, if you are aware of these and if you practice and explore them with other resources and, you know, and study, you know, human perception or study, you know, shadow work, it's out there. It's, you know, all of this stuff is out there. And sense making, there's a great sense making series at Rebel Wisdom and class, which can take you deep into sense making. There's all sorts of resources out there for all of these tools. There's our classes, you know, that we have, and our free resources, the publications and all that. And we're going to give you some handouts too. And we're going to give you some simple production practices that you can use, either on the ground in the moment, or something that you're doing step by step or in advance. And there's basically 5 different practice areas when you're when you're trying to create transformative media. And that is a practice to help us with the inception of ideas and processes, right? So for us to become a channel. And there's also induction in terms of bringing us into the creative moment. And then there are practices for consecrating this moment and the objects and all the different fields as being connected and extending and interconnected with each other, like we talked about earlier. And then there are resonance practices, which the Holy Encounter frame is a resonance practice. But here we're going to give you one that you can actually do like a meditation or perception practice. It's actually perception practice in advance. You could do it meditatively as well. And then there's a completion practice. What we're really doing in this way, this really helps, even if it's on the fly, is if you ritualize the process, there appears to be, it appears to increase the potency, the transformative potential of the work. Again, we did this research, and we don't know why yet, but it does appear to affect it. Shamans have been doing this for centuries, for millennia, where you're shaping the moment, and you're putting it in a frame, in a container that is a transformative container itself. And so if we're, you know, tapping into that greater source, inducting ourselves into the moment, consecrating all of our tools and processes, resonating with with everyone else around us, locally and collectively. And then after we're through, completing that, bringing that to a close, and just recognizing, ah, I did it. I just, but that that beginning, middle, and end process, you're creating a field that somehow increases the transformative potential of your process and what comes out of it.
Yeah, I think those can be very powerful, and obviously a lot of teams do this and groups do this. I saw the documentary on the Chicago Bulls called The Last Dance on their winning multi-seasons with Michael Jordan. And before every game, they would all gather in a huddle and say, ready to go, what are we going to do? Win! Or some, I can't remember exactly what they said, but it's that moment to create a group field with all of them. And clearly it worked pretty well for the Bulls because they were very successful at the time. I also
athletes understand this in a very primal way, in that your intentional field, they pre-visualize, they work on their intentional field. All athletes, they get that, and they get, the creation of a ritual. It's like you have a ritual, you go through a process, you get, and and so this is kind of foundational for the artist, for the athlete, for anybody who is trying to do something, great, do something, important, do something with purpose, do something, to achieve something important. This focus of the energy is vital. This focusing and channeling of that energy. And then recognizing and honoring that completion creates this ongoing field that you could keep coming back to. And it kind of tells your being, your body, and all dimensions of your being that, okay, you can chill out now. You can rest. You can decompress now.
Yeah, and that's what we want for all of you watching this. We want you to be creating amazing things that can transform the world. We need intervention at scale, and that requires as many people as possible to participate in this expanding your perceptual field, turning your perceptual field into an object of your own awareness, and then go out and create media, even if it's your posts on Facebook or your posts on Twitter or short films you put on YouTube or feature films. I actually heard a woman who got hired, who's a dancer, got hired on the show Transparent, which is Jill Soloway is the creator. And she said it was the most amazing experience she ever had because, and this is a big show, expensive time, at the beginning of every day, they would say, how's everybody doing? Does anybody have anything they want to say? And they had a little box that people could stand up on and say what was going on in their life or what was going on in their careers or in their heads. And she said for like an hour they did this at, and time on a set, if you were on a set, it's very expensive on a Hollywood set. And they did this every day, and this created this whole field. It was the most amazing thing.
That's a resonance practice. That's a perfect resonance practice. And a lot of filmmakers, they do this. A lot of filmmakers that do this. And there's solid data that something happens. It's very potent. When two or more are gathered in my name, in an intentional field. If you synchronize the intentional field collectively. So that's why the intentional field is important for us individually, but when we work collectively in our sense-making networks or on the sets, or if we're with a team in the field or whatever, that shared intentional field is vital, and it creates this resonance where I heard this one artist talk about this, and I forgot who, sorry, but that the collective art only works beautifully when each artist in the collective field is recognizing they are one hair on the brush. And that if we are resonant, the brush flows. And with shamanic practices that we're talking about, awareness practice, we can do that in a collective field and for the collective situation we're in and the non-local collective all around us. And we can, we could tap into that. There's this great painting, I forgot who again, but it's like a wizard or a shaman standing on top of the earth with their hands up and all the universes kind of coming down into them. And that is what the shaman does. The shaman brings all worlds together. And the shaman is a channel between this reality and the other realities. And a lot of what we're talking about here is to help you become aware of all these multiple realities so that your mind opens to this shamanic field that we're talking about.
Beautiful.
And just try to work on all this and get yourself prepared, because we are all now called to be media shamans. It's our only way forward, is to really understand media, how it speaks, and how we can use it to help each other through this transition and beyond.
Good luck, everyone.
So stay safe, stay well, stay awake.